Okay, so we're going to begin learning about some of the techniques I've been learning and sharing them with you. There are a multitude of ways to evaluate the flute, and it can be highly subjective. Everybody has their way of doing things, and their way is the right way, and so on and so on. I have making no proclamation that my techniques are the right techniques. I just want to pass on what I've learned and what works for me. And I'm really hoping that if I do something wrong, somebody leaves a comment and say, hey, you might try this or check out that, because I'm very open. I know the Spirit delivers exactly what I need to know, and maybe I get some more information through posting videos on YouTube. Today's subject is going to be about back pressure, and it was actually stimulated by Brad Young. I was at the Sweetgrass Flute Festival in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and Brad was a vendor there and I was, and because Brad's he's an awesome flute maker and highly experienced, I asked him for his opinion. And he only tried one of my flutes, but he says, that's too unstable. It breathes, too easy, jumps to the upper octave too quickly. And I have another professional friend who also says, well, there's not enough back pressure. So I began to evaluate, okay, what are the factors which control back pressure? And obviously one is the size of the flue and the configuration, how tight is it. I started ramping the flue and having a very small area, which was a 32nd of an inch. It was great for wet out, but it also had a tendency to increase or not increase, but it made the flute less stable. So that's what we're going to talk about, and the instrument I'm going to use to measure pressure is this. It's a magnehelic pressure gauge. Actually, it's a manometer. It measures pressure in inches of water. A human doesn't have that much air pressure, and this will measure how many inches of water, in this case from 0 to 3 inches of water. And I'm going to show you 3 different flutes that have 3 different back pressures. But I think a better term is not back pressure. Back pressure could mean something to everybody. A person who has COPD might think a little bit of back pressure is way too much, and a person who's an athlete has a much greater lung capacity, high back pressure wouldn't really mean anything to them. What I've decided to call it is dynamic range, and I've never heard this term before, but I call dynamic range the pressure from the lowest amount of pressure in a flute that makes a reasonable sound to the amount of pressure that causes the flute to break into the next octave. That creates a range. So from the minimum pressure to make the sound in the flute all the way up to when the flute breaks into the upper octave. So I've got 3 flutes. I'm going to show you how this pressure gauge works. I'm introducing the instruments I use kind of one at a time. This gives you a little bit of education on a particular item and shows you what's out there. A person may or may not be interested in pursuing the technology, but I find it helpful because it gives me control over the voice of the flute. So I'm going to pause here and I'll set up the camera so you can see and hear what I'm talking about. Okay, so here we are. The gauge goes from 0 to 3, and that's 3 inches of water. Anyway, I use this little mouthpiece. I'll insert that into the flute, and then it measures the pressure on this side, and I end up blowing in on this end here. So here we go with flute number 1. This is actually one of my favorite flutes. It's an F sharp. That's the lowest pressure. It makes a clean sound to me. It breaks to the upper octave right around, anywhere between 2 and 3, about 2.5. All right. Here's an unstable flute. Though I love the voice of this flute, it's very, very unstable. It has a very narrow range, particularly if you do any tonguing. So it breaks up at 1 inch, it'll break over. And then the last one I'm going to show you is kind of in between those two. That was pinched. Airline was pinched. Alright, here we go. This starts to break around 2. Now it also depends how fast you put the air in. For example, if I do a quick burst, will break it up to the next octave even faster. Anyway, that's just a simple demonstration of dynamic range, and it can really vary between flutes. So that's the what I think works best, at least what works best for me, is when it breaks around 2 to 3 inches of water. So we'll let it go at that and keep on fluting. Summary about dynamic range. The magnehelic pressure gauge is used in clean rooms. You can find one at Dwyer Instruments. I bought mine, I believe, through eBay. eBay and Amazon, you can get them for anywhere from probably $20 to $50. I recently bought a new one from Amazon. I'm kind of eager to try it, which it's digital, and the big advantage is it'll record an average. So if a person's playing, you can tell what their average breath pressure is. Pressure means everything in a flute. If you have an unstable flute, too much pressure too easily bumps up, and I'm going to illustrate that. It happens particularly when you're tonguing. You got if you tongue a flute. This was the more stable flute. This is the less stable flute. So it keeps wanting to jump up to that upper octave too quickly. The rate of airflow, a flute responds differently if you have a slow increase of air into the flute as compared to a sudden burst of air. Anyway, a less stable flute can be helpful, however, not as unstable as that. last one I played there. But a less stable flute can encourage a new person to gain a greater respect for their breath control and how important breath control really is. There's, every flute player is different. A person who has lung problems may want a very easy blowing flute. A new player may want a flute that doesn't jump to the upper octave at all. And a professional player may want a flute which has a high dynamic range. As a flute maker, it's very, very helpful to know the person who's going to be playing the flute and what they're looking for. It might be that a person wants a highly unstable flute because it can play anguish, cries very easily. Now, a good flute player, of course, they can control that by allowing air to leak in under their fingertips. But it's just, trying to figure out what the person wants. However, not all jobs are custom jobs. You make flutes, and that's why I say I'm an adoption agency for the flute spirit. I make flutes, and the spirit sees that they go to the right people. Anyway, through these videos, I want to explore in more detail some of these various characteristics and introduce you to some other equipment. Most of the other equipment is free. However, there's some things that need to be learned, and we'll get into that in the next video. Anyway, keep on fluting.